Rain still clung to the air like a heavy memory when the yellow Lamborghini came tearing into the parking lot, slicing across the wet pavement as if the world owed it space. The sound ripped through the quiet neighborhood, a sharp scream of engine, an ego that made every mechanic in the small shop glance up at the same time. The car didn't stop, it slammed to a halt. The engine coughed once, then purred angrily, and before the sound could fade, the door flew open so hard it bounced back. A tall man stepped out, his gray suit untouched by a single drop of rain, his eyes burning with a rage that seemed older than the storm outside. Victor Holley, billionaire, investor man, who wore power like a perfume, and today, a man who looked like someone had dared to scratch the crown off his head. He marched into the shop without a word, just footsteps, sharp, fast, echoing like hammer hits. Every mechanic froze. One dropped a wrench. Another shifted nervously behind a workbench. Even the radio in the corner seemed to lower its volume, as if sensing trouble brushing through the door. But one man didn't move, Marcus Reed, a quiet black mechanic with strong shoulders, scarred knuckles, and eyes that carried the weight of someone who had learned to swallow a lifetime of disrespect. He stood near his toolbox, wiping grease from his palms, calm in a room where everyone else felt the walls shrink. Victor walked straight toward him, not even looking left or right. His finger stabbed the air like an accusation already delivered. "You scratched my Lamborghini," he thundered, voice shaking with fury. "You think I wouldn't notice?" His words cracked through the room like lightning. Marcus blinked. Once, slow, steady, he turned toward the car, toward the faint line along the fender, barely visible in the glow of the overhead lights. A line so small, most eyes wouldn't catch it. But Victor wasn't most eyes. Not when it came to what he owned. Not when it came to what he controlled. The shop fell into a heavy silence. Even the sound of dripping rainwater outside seemed louder. Then the billionaire's shouting. Marcus let the stillness settle before he answered. He didn't snap. He didn't defend himself with fear or panic. He simply breathed, the kind of breath you learn to take when life has taught you that anger is a losing game. So Marcus said quietly, "I never touched your car." Victor scoffed, the sound sharp and cruel. "People like you always have excuses." There it was, the sting behind the words. Everyone heard it. Everyone felt it. Workers exchanged quick glances, uncomfortable, torn between looking and looking away. Marcus felt the sentence hit him not like a surprise, not like something new, but like a bruise being pressed again and again. He kept his chin low, eyes calm, but something in his chest tightened, a small knot of pain twisting in a place he had learned to guard carefully. Victor stepped closer, towering over Marcus as if height could force confession. "Don't play dumb with me. This car was perfect when I dropped it off. And now look, a scratch. A scratch I didn't put there. So who else could it be?" He leaned in, voice growing louder. "I'm waiting for an answer." Marcus kept his posture steady. "Sir, may I have a moment to explain?"
"Explain," Victor
repeated with a cold laugh. "You think I came here to listen to your stories? Do you know how much this car is worth? Do you even understand what a scratch like that costs?" His voice rose with every question, building like a storm about to split the sky. A few mechanics moved uneasily. One opened his mouth as if to speak, then shut it quickly, unwilling to risk Victor's anger landing on him instead. The billionaire glared around the shop, then right back at Marcus. "Saw should sue this whole place," he snapped. "Do you hear me? I could shut all of you down with one phone call." Marcus didn't lift his voice, didn't widen his stance, didn't try to match the heat burning from Victor's eyes. He simply held his ground, that quiet kind of strength, the kind that doesn't need volume to be seen. "Sir," he said slowly, "I understand you're upset, but I did not scratch your car." Victor shook his head as if the truth was an inconvenience he refused to accept. He jabbed his finger toward the fender again. "It didn't scratch itself." Marcus nodded once. "I didn't say it did." The room felt frozen in place. Everyone watched, breath held. The tension thickened until it felt like the air itself could snap. Victor's jaw clenched so hard a vein rose at his temple. "If you didn't do it," he hissed, "then who did? Tell me that." Marcus didn't answer right away. He looked at the car again. He looked at the wet pavement outside. He looked at the billionaire whose anger was not really about the scratch but about the belief that someone like Marcus couldn't be trusted. And then Marcus lifted his chin. Only a fraction, but enough for Victor to notice. Enough for the whole shop to feel the shift. So Marcus said, "Give me 1 minute. Let me show you something." Victor squinted, suspicion flashing in his eyes. "Show me what?" Marcus didn't blink. "The truth." The word hung in the air like a challenge. Victor frowned, caught between rage and curiosity. He didn't like being told to wait. He didn't like being told anything at all. But something in Marcus's calmness, something in the steady certainty of his voice made him pause. The workers held their breath, watching two worlds collide in the middle of a small auto shop. A billionaire's rage, ready to crush anyone who stood in his way, and a mechanic's dignity, holding against the storm with nothing but honesty in worn-down hands. The scratch glinted faintly under the shop lights. A thin line, a tiny flaw, yet powerful enough to shatter a man's livelihood. Marcus knew it. Victor believed it, and everyone watching felt the weight of what might come next. Little did Victor know that his anger loud and heavy was standing on top of a truth he hadn't even seen yet. A truth that was already waiting outside, sitting silently under the fading rain. A truth that would crack his assumptions open and leave him stunned. Marcus stepped toward the car. Victor followed. The storm wasn't over. It was only beginning. Victor paced the shop with the kind of confidence only a man who owned half the city could carry. His steps were loud, sharp, claiming the concrete floor like it belonged to him alone. Every stomp sent a message. This place, these people, this moment, were under his control. His voice cut through the room like a cold blade, echoing off the walls with a power that made everyone else shrink. A customer waiting for an oil change stepped aside, clutching his receipt like it was a shield. A younger mechanic lowered his eyes, pretending to recheck a tire he had already checked twice. No one wanted to be in the billionaire's path. No one wanted to catch that fire. "You're paying for this," Victor snapped, stabbing his finger at Marcus as if pointing at a criminal caught red-handed. "Do you hear me? Or I'll shut this whole place down." "Don't test me." Marcus inhaled slowly, the air catching in his chest. His jaw tightened, but he didn't let anger spill through, not now. Not in front of a man looking for any excuse to crush him. He stood still, hands by his sides, shoulders squared. "Sir," he said quietly, "let me explain," but Victor wasn't interested in explanations. He cut him off with a shout that startled even the air. "I don't want your explanations." The words hit Marcus like thrown stones. And then, as if humiliation needed to be recorded, Victor reached into his coat and pulled out his phone. He held it high, aimed straight at Marcus's face, the red light blinking like an accusation. "Say it," Victor ordered. "Admit what you did." For a moment, Marcus didn't breathe. He felt the world around him fade, the noise, the movement, even the smell of oil and rubber. Suddenly, he wasn't a mechanic standing in his workplace, he was a target. A man placed under a spotlight he never asked for. A man pushed toward a confession he didn't know. His throat felt tight, not from guilt, but from the weight of a lie being forced on him. The other mechanics watched helplessly. One older man muttered under his breath, "Marcus, just say something." "He won't stop." But Marcus didn't open his mouth. He didn't nod, he didn't bow his head. He shook it once, not from pride, but from something deeper, principled, a simple belief that truth should matter, even when someone with power tries to bury it. "Mr. Holler," Marcus began softly, voice steady despite the storm rising around him. "I respect your property. I would never scratch a car. There's more to this." Victor rolled his eyes so hard it looked painful. More, he scoffed. "You think I'm stupid?" His voice grew louder, feeding off its own rage. He paced again, waving his arms toward the fender. "I bring my car in flawless, and now there's a mark on it. You think I'm blind?" He didn't give Marcus a chance to respond. He didn't want him to. Instead, Victor unleashed a wave of accusations, faster and louder with each breath. First, he called Marcus negligent. Then, he accused him of being careless. Then, incompetent. And finally, dishonesty poured out of Victor's mouth like venom. Every word slammed into Marcus's chest, chipping away at dignity he had worked years to build. But Marcus didn't break. He didn't shout back. He didn't curse. He didn't defend himself with anger. He stood there, breathing slow and deep, holding on to the last piece of his pride like it was a lifeline. His calmness irritated Victor even more. "You think silence makes you look innocent?" Victor laughed bitterly. "It makes you look guilty. Guilty and scared." Marcus lifted his eyes, just enough to meet Victor's. His voice was quiet, so quiet the shop leaned in to hear it. "I'm not scared," he said, "and I'm not guilty." He paused. "Let me show you something." That one line made the air shift. It cut through Victor's shouting like a soft knife. The billionaire froze, the phone still aimed at Marcus's face. His eyes narrowed, confused by the sudden strength in the mechanic's tone. Marcus never raised his voice, never tried to push back. But right now, he sounded like a man holding onto a truth so solid it could not be shaken. The shop fell silent again. Everyone watched Victor, waiting to see how he would react. He frowned, annoyed but curious. "What could you possibly show me?" He snapped. "More excuses." Marcus shook his head gently. "No excuses, just the truth." A muscle twitched in Victor's cheek. He hated being challenged, hated being asked to wait, hated the idea that someone like Marcus might know something he didn't, but he also hated the uncertainty that floated suddenly between them. He lowered the phone slightly, though it still hovered in his hand. Marcus stepped closer to the car, moving with a calmness that seemed almost unnatural under the weight of humiliation pressing on him. He ran his fingers along a part of the fender that Victor hadn't even looked at yet. The light caught a faint shine of moisture where the rain had clung earlier. Marcus bent slightly, studying something only he seemed to notice. Victor watched, arms crossed, impatience clawing at him. Well, he snapped, "What are you doing? Stop wasting my time." But Marcus didn't look up. "I'm not wasting your time, sir." He spoke with the same steady tone he used when fixing engines. "I'm trying to give it back to you." Victor blinked, confused. That line didn't make sense to him. It wasn't the voice of a guilty man. It wasn't the voice of a man with something to hide. It was the voice of someone who had stayed patient for far too long. The workers exchanged glances. They felt something shifting, subtle, quiet, but real. The storm wasn't over, but the wind was changing direction. Marcus stood up slowly, turning toward Victor. His eyes were calm, clear. "Mr. Holly," he said softly, "before you destroy my name in front of everyone, before you tear down this entire shop, let me show you something. Then you can decide what's true." Victor opened his mouth, ready to snap again, but something in Marcus's expression forced him to pause. The mechanic who never raised his voice suddenly looked like a man who carried the truth in his pocket, waiting for the right moment to unfold it. And in that pause, in that tiny silent breath between accusation and revelation, the entire shop held still. Knowing the storm of humiliation was reaching its peak and the truth was about to punch through, Marcus walked toward the open garage door without rushing, without fear, without even glancing back to see whether Victor would follow. He already knew the billionaire would. Anger has a way of dragging a person forward, even when they don't understand why. The sunlight outside was bright and sharp, still bouncing off puddles from the morning rain. It hit the yellow Lamborghini like a spotlight on a stage, making every curve glow. Victor stepped out behind him, jaw clenched, chest rising and falling like he couldn't decide whether to yell again or breathe. His phone was still in his hand, the camera still open, as if he expected another confession to film. But Marcus didn't flinch. He crouched beside the fender again, moving slowly, respectfully, like he was approaching something fragile. For a moment, Victor thought he was finally going to point at the scratch and agree to blame, admit defeat, bow his head. But Marcus didn't even look at the scratch. He pointed past it. "Look here," Marcus murmured, his voice so soft it almost got lost in the hum of traffic outside. Victor frowned, confused, but something in Marcus's tone made him bend closer. The sunlight caught the small metallic panel just right, and suddenly, the faint shape that Marcus had seen earlier came into view. Not a scratch, not a scrap, a reflection. A crushed curve in the dust and moisture. An imprint. Sharp, rounded, familiar. Victor blinked, leaning in farther. His brows drew tight as the shape grew clearer. This wasn't from a wrench. This wasn't from a tool. This wasn't from anything a mechanic would use. As the angle shifted, the truth became unmistakable. The shape was curved like a small metal bar. Two rubber ridges on the edge. A handle, a bicycle handlebar. Victor's stomach dropped. His breath hitched. He straightened slowly, turning his head, scanning the lot like a man trying to convince himself he was wrong. But he wasn't wrong. Not when he saw the teenager standing a few yards away, frozen in place as if the world had paused on his heartbeat. Ethan, his own son. His bike lay on its side behind a parked car, one handlebar bent slightly inward, dust smeared across the rubber grip. Ethan's eyes were wide, terrified like a child caught between fear and guilt. His face had drained of color, and the wind hit him and he didn't even blink. But Marcus didn't turn toward him, he didn't point. He didn't expose anything. He stayed crouched, hand steady, voice calm. "The scratch was made before you arrived, sir," he said quietly, "by someone who didn't mean any harm. No name, no fingers pointed, no blame tossed back at the man who had humiliated him moments ago. Just the truth placed gently in the air, offered without anger, without judgment." Victor felt his chest tighten, his heart knocking against his ribs. His gaze snapped to Ethan, then back to Marcus, as if trying to understand why this man, this mechanic he had talked down to, yelled at Tretton, would choose to protect his son. Ethan took a shaky step forward. His sneakers splashed into a puddle. His voice cracked. "Dad," he whispered, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. I was riding fast and I didn't know what to do. I panicked." His voice just fell apart at the end. All the air left Victor's body at once. His anger slipped away like ice melting under sunlight. He stared at his son, the same boy he lectured about responsibility, the same boy who always tried too hard to impress him, and suddenly saw fear where he expected recklessness. Ethan wasn't scared of breaking the car. He was scared of disappointing his father. Victor's shoulders sagged. His jaw loosened. His breath softened into something almost fragile. He looked at Marcus again, really looked at him. Not the way he had earlier, not through the lens of superiority or assumption, but as a man looking at another man who had just saved his child from humiliation, a man who had shown more dignity in 5 minutes than Victor had shown in the entire morning. And that truth hit hard. Marcus stood slowly, wiping his hands on his coveralls, not to show cleanliness, but simply out of habit. He wasn't trying to look noble. He wasn't trying to teach a lesson. He wasn't trying to earn respect from the billionaire who had nearly destroyed his name. He was simply doing what he believed was right. And maybe that was what stunned Victor the most. A man who had every reason to expose his son. Didn't. A man who had been insulted in front of a crowd, refused to return the pain. A man who had been filmed like a criminal, chose grace instead of revenge. The truth sat heavy between them, reshaping the air. Victor lowered his phone. The screen dimmed against his palm. For a moment he didn't know what to say. Words felt too small, too weak. He looked at Marcus with a kind of awe that felt unfamiliar, uncomfortable, but honest. Marcus didn't smile. He didn't nod like he expected gratitude. He simply held Victor's gaze with calm, steady eyes that said he wasn't afraid anymore. Behind them, Ethan sniffed, wiping his face with the back of his hand. He opened his mouth as if to explain again, but Victor gently lifted a hand to stop him, not in anger, not in disappointment, but in understanding. The moment stretched, quiet but full, like a truth settling into place. Victor turned back to Marcus, and in that split second, something inside him cracked open, a place where ego used to sit. For the first time, he saw Marcus not as a worker, not as a guy in a coverall, not as someone beneath him, but as a man of character, a man who had more integrity in the dirt under his fingernails than Victor had shown all morning. The twist had landed, the truth had surfaced, and the dignity Victor had never bothered to notice had just saved his son from shame. But the moment didn't end there. It couldn't, not when everything Victor believed about himself was now being rewritten by the very man he had tried to tear down. Victor stood in the quiet street, shame burning through his chest so hot it felt like it could melt the gold watch on his wrist. The same street he had marched across like a king only minutes earlier now felt too loud, too bright, too honest. Every harsh word he had thrown at Marcus came back like echoes slapping against the walls of his mind. He heard himself again, sharp, ugly, cruel. Words he spoke not because he knew truth, but because power made him think he deserved answers without earning them. And now those same words made him feel small, smaller than he could ever admit, smaller than he had ever allowed himself to be. Marcus stood a few feet away, quiet as a shadow, his hands folded calmly in front of him. No anger, no bitterness, no demand for respect. Just that steady presence he always carried, like a man whose strength didn't come from loud voices or big money, but from knowing exactly who he was. His eyes were soft, but not weak, patient, but not submissive. Victor had spent years around people who bowed at his wealth, people who said yes sir without thinking, people who rushed to fix problems he caused. But in Marcus, he saw something different, something money couldn't buy and status couldn't shake: dignity. Victor swallowed hard. His lips trembled before the words even came, and his voice cracked like a cheap piece of glass. He blinked, trying again. I'm sorry. Truly, it wasn't loud. It wasn't grand. It wasn't decorated with excuses or wrapped in a speech. It was just raw, honest, a kind of apology that comes only when a man finally sees the mirror he's been running from. The shop workers stood near the doorway, frozen in disbelief. Their eyes were wide, some mouths slightly open. A billionaire apologizing to a mechanic he had just humiliated. It was like watching a storm suddenly kneel before the ocean. For a moment, it felt as if the whole world had tilted, as if gravity itself had paused to witness something rare, a powerful man lowering his pride, not because he lost, but because he had finally learned. But Marcus didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He didn't act like a man who just won a victory. He simply nodded once, slow and sincere. Your son is safe, he said gently. And that's what matters. His voice held no resentment, no hidden anger, just truth. Simple, steady truth. Victor exhaled long, shaky, humbled. That breath carried out everything he had been holding in, the arrogance, the certainty, the heat of misplaced rage. It left his chest empty enough to finally feel. He turned to Ethan, who stood awkwardly beside his bike, shoulders curled inward like he wished the ground would swallow him. Victor placed a gentle hand on his son's shoulder, not the heavy, commanding grip he usually used, but something softer, something real. We tell the truth, he whispered, even when it hurts. Ethan nodded, tears hanging at the corners of his eyes, scared not of punishment but of disappointment. He had expected yelling, maybe anger, maybe cold distance, but instead he got honesty, and it made his throat tighten. Victor turned back to Marcus, breathing out the hardest question he had asked in years. Marcus, how can I make this right? But for the first time, Marcus gave a faint smile, small, humble, warm enough to soften even the tension in the air. Treat people fairly, sir, he answered, that's all. No demands for money. No requests for favors. No bitterness disguised as advice. Just a simple call for decency. A reminder that respect doesn't cost a thing but means everything. Victor felt something shift deep inside him. Not guilt. Not embarrassment. Something deeper. Something that felt like waking up. Because standing in front of him wasn't a worker. Wasn't a mechanic. Wasn't a man he could shout at and walk away from. It was a man with a spine. A man with a heart. A man with a kind of character Victor wished he saw more in his own world. The kind of character he secretly wished existed in himself. Victor approached the shop entrance where all the workers still stood, uncertain, watching with held breath. He turned toward them, and for the first time in years, he didn't speak like a billionaire, or a man who owned half the city, or someone used to hearing his voice echo over others. He spoke like a man who had learned something. This man, Victor said, pointing to Marcus with quiet pride, is the best mechanic I've ever met. and the kind of man I hope my son grows up to be. A soft murmur rolled through the shop. Shock, respect, and something close to awe. Not because of the praise, but because of the humility behind it. Billionaires didn't talk like that. Bosses didn't talk like that. Men who lived on top of the world didn't look eye to eye with people who fixed their cars. But Victor did. And it changed the room. Marcus looked down, not out of shame, but out of humility, the kind that sits deep in the bones. He didn't need applause. Didn't need validation. He already knew who he was. That was his quiet power. Victor walked back to his Lamborghini slowly, thoughtfully, with Ethan beside him, pushing his bike like it weighed more than the world. Not because of the accident, but because of everything the moment had revealed. Before stepping inside the car, Victor glanced back once more, not at the shop, not at the workers, but at the man who had taught him a lesson without raising a voice. And as he drove away, the world seemed different. The sun felt brighter, the street felt calmer, and the silence between father and son felt meaningful instead of awkward. Because sometimes life delivers a truth so simple it hits hard. Respect is not measured by wealth. Character is not defined by status. And truth, no matter how small, has the power to humble even the highest among us. In a world that worships money, sometimes the richest person in the room is the one who refuses to trade his character for anything.